She dedicated her life to her son, but now she's getting lost in the streets of her own memory. The daughter-in-law, who seemed kind and caring, gave the family a false sense of relief. But behind her gentleness lies a quiet cruelty, until a new caregiver uncovers the truth. Mrs. Geraldine Campbell gazed out the window of her apartment on Fifth Avenue, with eyes that no longer recognized everything they saw. At 78 years old, she still maintained the elegant posture that characterized her throughout her life in New York City, but something in her gaze had changed in recent months. When the doorman greeted her that morning, she responded with a vague smile, unable to remember the name of Sebastian, who had worked in the building for over 20 years. "Good morning, Mrs. Geraldine. It's a beautiful day today, isn't it?" the man asked gently. "Good morning." She hesitated, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "Yes, it's a very beautiful day." That hesitation did not go unnoticed by Raphael Campbell, her only son, who accompanied her. Tall, with graying hair at his temples and an impeccably tailored suit, Raphael was the image of a successful businessman. At 47, he had transformed his father's small engineering firm into one of the largest civil construction conglomerates in the United States. "Mom, it's Sebastian. He's been working here since we moved in," Raphael explained patiently as they walked to the car. "Oh, of course, Sebastian," she replied, but the vacant look in her eyes indicated that the information had not registered. It wasn't the first episode. The week before, Mrs. Geraldine had forgotten her way back from the corner bakery, where she had bought fresh bread every morning for years. A neighbor found her, disoriented, 3 blocks away. Before that, there was the stove left on for hours, bills paid twice, and phone calls in the middle of the night asking what time her husband, deceased 8 years prior, would be home. Raphael drove in silence through the congested streets of downtown Manhattan, casting occasional glances at his mother. As an only child, he knew that the responsibility of caring for her rested entirely on his shoulders. Since Marianne, his wife, had suddenly passed away in a car accident 3 years ago, he felt alone with the weight of his responsibilities. "Where are we going, son?" Geraldine asked, adjusting her purse on her lap. "To Dr. Claudia Meadows' office, Mom, the neurologist, remember? We talked about it last night and this morning." "Neurologist? But there's nothing wrong with my brain," she protested, suddenly irritated. "You're exaggerating." "I'm just a little forgetful. It happens with age," Raphael sighed, unwilling to argue. The appointments had started 2 months ago, but Geraldine seemed to forget each visit as soon as they left the office. The test results, however, were clear and devastating. Early-stage Alzheimer's, with moderate to rapid progression. Dr. Claudia Meadows' office was in a modern building in the Upper East Side. The neurologist, a middle-aged woman with a gentle smile, was already waiting for them when they arrived. "How are you feeling today, Mrs. Geraldine?" she asked, leading the elderly woman to the examination room. "I'm great, doctor. I don't understand why my son insists on these appointments." While his mother was being examined, Raphael waited in the reception area, checking messages on his cell phone. Campbell Engineering was in the midst of negotiations for a major urban revitalization project, and meetings consumed much of his time. How would he find space in his life to adequately care for his mother? When the consultation ended, Dr. Claudia asked to speak with Raphael privately. "Mr. Campbell, we need to consider some changes in your mother's routine. The medication will help slow the progression, but she should no longer be left alone. The risks are significant. But doctor, I have the company, meetings, travel. I understand your position, but perhaps it's time to consider a professional caregiver, someone who can be with her full-time." Raphael nodded, feeling the weight of the decision. It was difficult to accept that the woman who raised him alone after his father's premature death, who had taught him to read and to dream big, now needed constant care. That night, in his penthouse apartment in the same building where his mother lived, Raphael stared at the illuminated city through the panoramic windows. The glass of whiskey in his hand remained untouched as he thought of solutions. The idea of hiring a professional caregiver made sense, but how to find someone trustworthy? His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Maurice, his personal assistant. "Raphael, sorry to call at this hour, but Teresa just informed me she won't be able to work for your mother anymore. Pear seems her husband got a job in Chicago and they're moving next week." Teresa was the housekeeper who helped clean Geraldine's apartment twice a week. She wasn't a caregiver, but her regular presence brought some comfort to Raphael. I understand, Maurice. Thanks for letting me know. Actually, I'm thinking of hiring someone full-time to care for my mother. Could you help find candidates? Of course, I already have a few recommendations. One of them is highly recommended. She worked for the Morrison family for years. I can schedule interviews for tomorrow. Perfect, the sooner the better. When he hung up, Raphael felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Entrusting his mother's care to a stranger was not an easy decision, but it seemed inevitable. The next morning, he cancelled 2 meetings to personally oversee the interviews. Maurice had selected 3 candidates, but it was the last one who immediately caught his attention. Janine Sanders entered the meeting room with a confident posture and a warm smile. Tall, with dark skin and black hair pulled back in an impeccable bun, she seemed to radiate competence and calm. "Mr. Campbell, it's a pleasure to meet you," she said, extending her hand. "Maurice explained your mother's situation, and I want you to know that I have extensive experience with Alzheimer's patients." During the interview, Janine spoke about her 6 years working with the Morrison family, where she cared for the patriarch until his last days. She mentioned nursing and first aid courses, as well as her patient and affectionate approach. "For me, it's not just about administering medication or ensuring physical safety. It's about dignity and quality of life," she explained. "Every person deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their condition." Raphael was impressed. Janine seemed perfect, qualified, experienced, and with impeccable references. Perhaps with her caring for Geraldine, he could finally breathe a little easier. "When could you start?" he asked, already decided. "Immediately, if you wish. I'm available starting tomorrow." "Great. I'd like you to meet my mother today, if possible. We can go to her apartment now." The meeting between Janine and Mrs. Geraldine went better than Raphael expected. The elderly woman, initially suspicious, was soon charmed by the new caregiver's kindness. "You have a beautiful home," Janine commented, admiring the photographs on the shelf. "Are these your grandchildren in this photo?" No. That's my Raphael when he was a child," Geraldine replied, smiling. "My only son. He was so tiny and already so serious." "He's still serious," Janine joked, making the elderly woman laugh. Raphael watched the interaction with a growing sense of relief. Perhaps this was the solution he had been looking for. With Janine caring for his mother, he could focus on his work without the constant guilt that tormented him. What he could not foresee was how that decision, made with the best intentions, would completely change the course of their lives in the months that followed. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing. The first few weeks with Janine were like a breath of fresh air in Mrs. Geraldine's apartment. The caregiver arrived promptly at 7 in the morning and only left when Raphael came to visit his mother after work. The apartment was always spotless. Meals were prepared with attention to the nutritional details recommended by Dr. Claudia, and Geraldine seemed more animated than in previous months. "She has a special way about her," Raphael commented to Maurice during a break at Campbell Engineering's office, on the 25th floor of a modern commercial building on Wall Street. "My mother has even started doing crosswords again, something she hadn't done for months." "I'm glad it worked out," Maurice replied, organizing documents on the glass table. "Her references were excellent, but there's always that initial insecurity." Raphael agreed, finally feeling able to fully focus on the large revitalization project for downtown New York City. Meetings with investors and municipal authorities demanded his full attention, and now he could dedicate himself without the constant worry about his mother's well-being. Janine seemed too perfect to be true. In addition to impeccably caring for the house and meals, she made a point of keeping Mrs. Geraldine mentally stimulated with games, readings, and small walks around the neighborhood. Whenever Raphael came to visit, he found his mother well-dressed, with her hair neatly arranged and a smile on her face. "Your son is here, Mrs. Geraldine," Janine announced with her melodious voice when Raphael rang the doorbell. "Look, just in time for the coffee I prepared." Visits became pleasant moments, with light conversations and laughter around the kitchen table. Raphael began to notice, however, how his mother seemed increasingly emotionally dependent on Janine, seeking her approval before answering simple questions or making basic decisions. "Can I tell him about our outing today, Janine?" Geraldine asked, her eyes seeking permission from the caregiver. "Of course you can, Mrs. Geraldine. Tell him everything we did," Janine replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Raphael attributed this behavior to the progression of the disease. Dr. Claudia had warned about the growing insecurity that Alzheimer's patients developed, and how it was common for them to lean on their primary caregivers. Still, something in that dynamic subtly bothered him. When they completed 2 months of work, Raphael offered Janine a raise, recognizing her dedication and the positive results. "You are very generous," she replied, accepting the envelope with gratitude. "Caring for Mrs. Geraldine is not just a job for me, it's a mission. She reminds me a lot of my grandmother." It was hard not to be charmed by this woman, who seemed to have been sent as a salvation. Raphael, still dealing with the grief of Marianne's loss, found in Janine not only a reliable caregiver, but also a pleasant female presence in his lonely life. The first crack in the perfect image happened on a rainy Thursday. Raphael had left the office early due to a severe storm that was lashing the city, causing monstrous traffic jams. He decided to stop by his mother's apartment before going up to his own. Upon reaching the corridor, still a few feet from the door, he heard Janine's voice. Not the sweet, patient voice he knew, but a harsh, irritated tone. "How many times do I have to repeat the same thing? You're doing this on purpose, it's impossible." Raphael stopped, surprised by the drastic change in tone. He approached silently, trying to understand the context before interfering. "Sorry, Janine, I don't remember." His mother's trembling voice made his heart clench. "Don't remember? How can you not remember if I just told you? I'm tired of your forgetting. If you keep this up, your son will end up putting you in a nursing home, you know? And with good reason." Raphael felt his blood boil. He was about to open the door when he heard footsteps approaching. Quickly, he moved back a few feet and pretended he had just arrived. Janine opened the door, completely composed, with her usual smile on her face. "Mr. Campbell, what a pleasant surprise. We were just talking about you." Behind her, sitting in the armchair in the living room, Mrs. Geraldine seemed smaller, more fragile, with reddish eyes. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, entering the apartment while studying his mother's face. "Of course, everything's great," Janine quickly replied. "Mrs. Geraldine is a little tired today, isn't she? The rainy weather always affects her mood." Geraldine merely nodded, not looking up. Raphael sat beside her and held her hands, noticing they were cold and trembling. "Mom, is everything really all right?" Before she could answer, Janine intervened. "Oh, we had a small accident earlier. Mrs. Geraldine spilled tea on her clothes and got upset with herself. I already explained that it happens. It was nothing serious." Throughout the visit, Raphael carefully observed the interaction between the two. Janine maintained her impeccable performance, attentive, patient, almost exaggeratedly gentle. His mother, however, seemed withdrawn, responding with monosyllables and avoiding contradicting anything the caregiver said. Upon leaving, Raphael was uneasy. What he had heard in the corridor did not match the Janine he knew, but it could have been just a moment of frustration. Everyone had their limits, and caring for someone with Alzheimer's was not an easy task. He decided to give Janine the benefit of the doubt, but began to show up at less predictable times in the following weeks. Most of the time, he found everything in order, with Janine performing her role perfectly. Occasionally, however, he caught cold glances, impatient sighs, or subtly cruel comments when she believed he wasn't paying attention. "You need to try harder," he heard her say in a low voice as she helped Geraldine with her coat. "Your son won't want a completely useless mother." His doubts grew, but Raphael hesitated to take any drastic action. After all, his mother was physically well cared for, her medications were administered correctly, and finding another trustworthy person would be a draining process. Furthermore, Geraldine had already developed a strong emotional dependence on Janine. One Sunday afternoon, while they were having lunch together, Raphael always made a point of spending Sundays with his mother. He noticed several bruises on Geraldine's arm when she raised her sleeve to wipe off a stain. "Mom, what happened to your arm?" he asked, concerned. Geraldine looked at the bruises as if seeing them for the first time, confusion in her gaze. I don't know. Mrs. Geraldine slipped in the bathroom the day before yesterday," Janine explained promptly. "I messaged you, didn't you receive it? It was just a scare. Dr. Claudia said it was nothing serious when I took her for a checkup. Raphael didn't recall any message, but with the amount of communications he received daily, it was possible it had gone unnoticed. Still, something in the explanation sounded hollow. We need to install grab bars in the bathroom, he commented. I'll arrange that tomorrow. Excellent idea, Janine agreed. I always say prevention is key. That night, reviewing his messages, Raphael confirmed that he had not received any notice about the fall or an emergency visit to the doctor. When he called Dr. Claudia the next day, he discovered that his mother had not been taken to the office that week. Janine's lie alarmed him. Why would she invent such a story? What had really happened to cause those bruises? Raphael realized he needed help to monitor the situation more closely. Someone who could be present when he couldn't. Someone Janine wouldn't see as a threat. It was Maurice who suggested the solution. How about hiring a nurse for regular visits? We can justify it as a medical recommendation for medication monitoring. That way we'd have another person evaluating your mother's well-being without appearing to distrust Janine. The idea was perfect. Raphael scheduled an appointment with Dr. Claudia, who immediately agreed to the plan, concerned about the reports of unexplained bruises. I have an excellent professional to recommend, the neurologist said. Helen Rivers, specializing in geriatric care. She can make visits 3 times a week, supposedly to monitor the response to medications and perform small routine examinations. 2 days later, Helen arrived at Raphael's office for a preliminary talk. At 42, with observant eyes and a tranquility that inspired confidence, the nurse immediately understood the complexity of the situation. We won't jump to conclusions. Mr. Campbell, she said in a firm voice, there are many possible explanations for the bruises and behaviors you described. My role will be to observe, document, and ensure your mother's well-being without creating unnecessary conflicts. Raphael felt for the first time in weeks that he had found an ally. What he didn't imagine was that Helen's arrival would trigger a series of events that would forever change the fragile balance of the routine he had established. Helen's arrival at Mrs. Geraldine's apartment was carefully planned. Raphael made sure to be present for the introductions, explaining to his mother and Janine that Dr. Claudia had recommended regular nurse visits to monitor the effects of the medication and adjust doses when necessary. It's a standard procedure for Alzheimer's patients on continuous medication, Helen explained naturally as she organized her work instruments on the living room table. I'll only be here 3 times a week for about 2 hours. I won't interfere with the routine you've already established. Janine smiled, but Helen, with her years of clinical experience, immediately noticed the tension at the corners of that smile and the defensive glint in the caregiver's eyes. Of course, it will be great to have the support of a healthcare professional. Janine replied, her voice overly sweet. Mrs. Geraldine sometimes gets confused with medication times, doesn't she, dear? The elderly woman nodded automatically, a movement Helen observed carefully. There was something in Geraldine's behavior, a withdrawal, a submission that triggered the first alarms in her trained mind. During that first visit, Helen made a point of establishing a genuine connection with Mrs. Geraldine, while checking her vital signs and asking simple questions to assess her cognitive orientation. She talked about light topics, the mild autumn weather in New York City, the flowers in the centerpiece vase, traditional recipes Geraldine might have learned from her own mother. Did you cook a lot when Mr. Raphael was little? Helen asked, taking the elderly woman's blood pressure. A genuine smile lit up Geraldine's face for the first time since Helen arrived. Oh yes. My Raphael loved my chicken with okra. It was the only way to get him to eat vegetables, she replied, a spark of vivid memory in her eyes. I still love it, Raphael interjected, touched by the memory. No one makes it like yours. Janine, who had been observing the interaction with her arms crossed, quickly approached. I've been trying to reproduce some recipes Mrs. Geraldine taught me, but she gets so tired in the kitchen lately, she commented, placing a possessive hand on the elderly woman's shoulder. Doctors recommend rest, don't they, Ms. Helen? Actually, Helen replied calmly, familiar activities like cooking can be excellent cognitive exercises for Alzheimer's patients, provided they are adequately supervised. Procedural memory, that related to tasks we've done for years, tends to remain preserved longer. A momentary silence followed that small contradiction. Helen noticed the quick glance Janine shot in her direction, not of curiosity or interest, but of evaluation, like someone sizing up an opponent. In subsequent visits, Helen always arrived at the same time, maintaining the predictability that was important for patients like Mrs. Geraldine. Over time, she realized that Janine had created a specific routine for these days. The apartment was impeccably tidy. Geraldine wore more elegant clothes than usual, and the medications were meticulously organized on the kitchen counter. It was a performance, Helen concluded after a few weeks of observation. A well-rehearsed one, it's true, but with revealing flaws for trained eyes like hers. The first concrete evidence came when Helen arrived 30 minutes earlier than usual, having informed Raphael about the change, but not Janine. Upon ringing the doorbell, she heard a commotion inside the apartment and raised voices. When Janine finally opened the door, her normally composed face showed signs of irritation quickly masked. "Miss Helen, you're early today," she commented, nervously adjusting her uniform. Behind her, Mrs. Geraldine was sitting on the sofa in simple house clothes, not the more formal attire she usually wore during Helen's visits. Even more revealing, the table where the medications were kept was empty. "Sorry for the change in time, I had to reorganize my schedule," Helen explained, entering naturally. "I see I caught you in the middle of your normal routine." "We were about to get ready to receive you," Janine replied, her tone artificial. Mrs. Geraldine just woke up from her afternoon nap. Helen looked at the wall clock. It was almost 5 in the afternoon, a time when Geraldine had usually already had tea and was doing some light activity, like watching television or flipping through magazines. "Did you sleep well, Mrs. Geraldine?" Helen asked, approaching the elderly woman. Before Geraldine could answer, Janine intervened. "She's a little disoriented after her nap. It's normal, isn't it? I'll make some tea for all of us while you do your examinations." When Janine left for the kitchen, Helen took the opportunity to talk to Geraldine alone. She sat beside her and in a soft voice asked, "How are you feeling today, really?" Geraldine quickly looked towards the kitchen, making sure Janine couldn't hear them before whispering, "She gets angry with me." "Angry how?" Helen gently insisted, keeping her voice low. "When I forget things, or when I spill food. She says I'm—" Geraldine hesitated, searching for the word a burden. "That my Raphael will send me away if I cause trouble." Helen's heart sank. Emotional abuse was often the first step to more severe forms of mistreatment, especially with vulnerable patients like Mrs. Geraldine. "Have you told your son about this?" Geraldine shook her head negatively, eyes welling up. "Janine says he's very busy, that I shouldn't bother him with silly things, and sometimes I don't even remember exactly what happened." She frowned, confused. "Maybe I'm imagining things." The sound of approaching footsteps made Geraldine fall silent immediately. Janine returned with a tea tray, her face now perfectly composed in a mask of solicitude. Over the following weeks, Helen began to systematically document her observations. She noticed how Geraldine recoiled when Janine approached abruptly, how the caregiver strictly controlled the elderly woman's access to the telephone, and more disturbingly, the irregular amount of medication remaining in the bottles, inconsistent with the prescribed doses. In one of her visits, while examining Geraldine's arms, Helen discovered new bruises, this time on the backs of her forearms, the type of injury that usually occurs when someone is grabbed forcefully. "What happened here, Mrs. Geraldine?" she asked, discreetly photographing the marks with her cell phone. I don't remember," the elderly woman replied, genuinely confused. The cruel nature of Alzheimer's made Geraldine a perfect victim. Her own recollections of the abuse were lost in the fog of the disease, leaving only an instinctive fear with no clear origin. That night, Helen called Raphael and requested an urgent meeting away from Mrs. Geraldine's apartment. They met the next day at a discreet cafe near his office. "I have reason to believe your mother is suffering abuse," Helen declared directly, after ensuring they would not be overheard. "Not only emotional, but possibly physical as well." Raphael paled. As much as he had his own suspicions, hearing that confirmation from a healthcare professional was devastating. "What evidence do you have?" he asked, his voice tense. Helen showed him photos of the bruises and shared her detailed observations about the behavior of both Geraldine and Janine. She also explained her concerns about the irregular administration of medication. "I believe Janine is sedating your mother beyond what is prescribed on some days, probably to have less work. That would explain the pattern of excessive drowsiness I noticed during some visits." Raphael ran his hands over his face, devastated. "How could I not have noticed this before? How could I have allowed this to happen right under my nose?" "Don't blame yourself," Helen said firmly. "Janine is extremely skilled at maintaining appearances. People like that usually are. Besides, your mother's condition makes everything more complex. She herself has difficulty remembering and reporting what happens. What should we do? Should I fire her immediately?" Helen shook her head. "We don't have enough evidence for legal action yet, and an abrupt dismissal could complicate the situation further. We need to better document what's happening." After a long discussion, they devised a plan. Raphael would discreetly install security cameras in the apartment under the pretext of monitoring his mother for falls or medical emergencies. Helen would increase the frequency of her visits, including some unannounced ones, and most importantly, they would find a suitable replacement for Janine, someone who could take over immediately once they had enough evidence to dismiss her. "I know an excellent caregiver who is available," Helen suggested. "We can interview her this week and have her on standby." As they parted ways, Raphael held Helen's hand a little longer than necessary. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come." Helen felt an unexpected warmth at that sincere gratitude. Professionally, she was just doing her job protecting a vulnerable patient. But there was something in that man's gratitude, in the way his eyes reflected a mixture of pain and determination, that touched something deeper within her. "We still have a lot of work ahead of us," she replied, gently withdrawing her hand. "But we'll make sure your mother is safe, I promise." As she walked back to her car, Helen reflected on the case. In her 15 years of geriatric nursing, she had witnessed similar situations. But something about this particular family, perhaps Raphael's devotion, perhaps Mrs. Geraldine's sweet fragility, stirred a special determination in her. What Helen didn't know was that while she and Raphael were planning their next steps, Janine was already becoming suspicious. The caregiver had noticed the more frequent visits, Helen's evaluative glances, the seemingly casual questions that always seemed aimed at exposing inconsistencies in her care routine, and Janine had no intention of losing her lucrative and comfortable job in the Campbell household. Not without a fight. The installation of the cameras was discreetly carried out by a trusted security company, while Janine took Mrs. Geraldine for a routine checkup with Dr. Claudia Meadows. Small, almost imperceptible, the cameras were strategically positioned in the living room, kitchen, and hallway leading to the bedrooms, common areas where there would be no invasion of privacy, but which would allow documentation of the interactions between the caregiver and the elderly woman. "All set." "Mr. Campbell," the technician informed, handing Raphael the monitoring application already installed on his cell phone. "You can access live footage or review recordings from the last 7 days. The system is motion-activated, so it won't take up much storage space." Raphael thanked him, a knot of anxiety forming in his stomach. Part of him hoped the cameras wouldn't capture anything, that Helen's suspicions were mistaken. It would be easier to find out he was wrong than to confirm he had left his mother vulnerable in the hands of someone who mistreated her. When Janine returned with Mrs. Geraldine, Raphael was waiting in the apartment. He had prepared a careful explanation about the new monitoring system for medical emergencies he had installed. "It's for your safety." "Mom," he explained, showing the small emergency button that came with the system. "If you fall or need urgent help when you're alone, just press this button, and I and the emergency services will be immediately notified." "What an excellent idea." "Mr. Campbell," Janine commented, examining the device with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I was indeed worried about the possibility of Mrs. Geraldine having an emergency when I needed to go to the bathroom or get something from the pharmacy." Her eyes scanned the ceiling and walls, and for a fleeting moment, Raphael feared she had noticed the cameras. But Janine made no additional comment, helping Geraldine settle onto the sofa while putting away the medications prescribed by Dr. Claudia. "Was the appointment smooth?" Raphael asked, carefully observing the interaction between the two. Perfectly fine, Janine replied before Geraldine could open her mouth. The doctor was satisfied with the progress and kept the same medication. Wasn't she, Mrs. Geraldine? The elderly woman nodded automatically, a gesture Raphael now recognized as part of the conditioning Janine had created. His mother, once a woman of strong opinions and a striking personality, now merely agreed, fearful of contradicting her caregiver. Actually, Raphael interjected, I'll call Dr. Claudia later to discuss the details. Last time there was a misunderstanding about the medication. I prefer to confirm directly. A flash of irritation crossed Janine's face, quickly masked by a complacent smile. Of course, you're right to stay informed. After all, your mother's health is a priority for all of us. That night, after leaving his mother's apartment, Raphael reviewed the first recordings. At first, nothing alarming. Janine preparing dinner, helping Geraldine with her medications, watching television next to her. It was only when he fast-forwarded to the moment he himself left the apartment that the transformation occurred. As soon as the door closed, Janine's face changed. The gentle smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of boredom and irritation. She scoffed, took the remote control from Geraldine's hand without asking, and changed the channel the elderly woman was watching. Enough of these silly soap operas, she said dryly. It's time for your sleeping medicine. But it's still early, Janine, Geraldine protested timidly. And this is my favorite show. Janine's response chilled Raphael's blood. I don't care. The sooner you sleep, the quieter my night. Besides, it's not like you're going to remember this show tomorrow anyway. In the following days, the cameras continued to capture disturbing evidence. Janine administering larger doses of medication than prescribed, ignoring Geraldine's requests for help to go to the bathroom, leaving her in humiliating situations, hiding food, and then accusing the elderly woman of having no appetite, talking on the phone with friends, laughing and calling Geraldine the crazy old lady, while the elderly woman was in the same room, but out of her compromised line of sight. In one of the most disturbing recordings, Janine held Geraldine's arm with excessive force, leaving red marks as she forced her to take medication. Swallow it, you stubborn old woman. Do you think I have all day to stand here waiting for your quirks? Raphael sent all the evidence to Helen, who methodically compiled it along with her own clinical observations. Together, they agreed that they already had enough material not only to dismiss Janine, but potentially to file a formal complaint with the authorities for elder abuse. Meanwhile, they interviewed and selected a new caregiver, Louisa Meadows, a 58-year-old retired nurse with vast experience in geriatric care and impeccable references. Unlike Janine, who had been hired hastily in a moment of desperation, Louisa underwent rigorous background checks and extensive interviews with both Raphael and Helen. We need to be absolutely sure this time, Raphael insisted during the selection process. I can't risk my mother's safety again. I completely understand your concern, Louisa replied calmly. That's why I suggest a 2-week probationary period, during which Ms. Helen could continue her regular visits. This would give your mother time to adapt to me and for you to properly evaluate my work. Louisa's common sense and professionalism reassured Raphael. She was ready to start as soon as Janine was dismissed. The confrontation, however, came sooner than they had planned. On a rainy Wednesday afternoon, Helen arrived at the apartment for an unscheduled visit and found Mrs. Geraldine alone, disoriented and visibly distressed, with her clothes wet. Mrs. Geraldine, what happened? Where's Janine? Helen asked, alarmed, as she helped the elderly woman sit down. She left. Said she'd be right back, Geraldine stammered, trembling. I had an accident. I couldn't make it to the bathroom in time. Helen's heart sank. Leaving a person with Alzheimer's alone was already serious negligence. Leaving her in that state was unforgivable. How long has she been gone? I don't know. The clock. I can't understand the hands anymore. Helen checked the security system. The cameras showed Janine leaving the apartment almost 2 hours earlier, coldly telling Geraldine that she would come back when she felt like it, and that the elderly woman shouldn't touch anything while she was gone. Immediately, Helen helped Geraldine clean up and change her clothes, trying to preserve her dignity throughout the process. While caring for her, she called Raphael. We need to act now, she said firmly. Your mother was left alone for hours. in unacceptable conditions. We can't wait any longer. Raphael arrived in less than 30 minutes, bringing Louisa with him. They had agreed that she would wait in the car until called, but the situation demanded immediate action. When Janine finally returned, almost 3 hours after her departure, she found not only Geraldine clean and fed, but also Raphael, Helen, and a stranger sitting in the living room. The shock on her face quickly gave way to defensiveness. "Mr. Campbell, what a surprise. I just went out to buy urgent medicine for your mother and ended up stuck in traffic because of the rain. I tried to call, but no one answered." Raphael slowly stood up, his face a mask of forced control. "My phone didn't register any calls from you, Janine. In fact, the security system we installed recorded you leaving almost 3 hours ago, telling my mother you'd come back when you felt like it." Color drained from Janine's face as her eyes scanned the ceiling, finally locating one of the discreet cameras. "Cameras, you were spying on me." Her voice wavered between indignation and fear. "That's illegal. An invasion of privacy. Not in common areas of my own property, when the objective is to ensure the safety of a vulnerable person," Raphael replied calmly. "Especially when there are well-founded suspicions of abuse." "Abuse?" Janine forced a laugh. "That's absurd. I've dedicated myself entirely to your mother, sacrificed my personal life." "We have everything documented, Janine," Helen interrupted, her tone professional but firm. "The incorrectly administered medications, the insults, the negligence, the bruises caused by you. She's making this up." Janine pointed at Helen, her control crumbling. "This woman wants my job from the start. Ask Mrs. Geraldine. Tell them, Mrs. Geraldine. Tell them how well I take care of you." All eyes turned to the elderly woman, who shrank into the armchair, visibly disturbed by the confrontation. For a moment, the fear of contradicting Janine seemed to paralyze her. Then, with a courage that surprised even Raphael, she spoke. "You say my son will send me away if I cause trouble. You say I'm useless. You leave me alone. You hide my glasses and then say I lost them. I'm afraid of you, Janine." The words came out broken, confused, but unequivocal in their content. Janine was momentarily speechless, then tried another approach. "She's confused. She doesn't know what she's saying. It's the disease talking. After all I've done, is this how I'm treated? With false accusations based on the words of a person who doesn't even remember what she had for breakfast?" "Enough," Raphael said, his voice low but authoritative. "Your service is terminated, Janine. Louisa will assume your duties from now on. You will be paid for the days worked this month. But I want you to leave immediately." Janine looked at each of them, the mask of the dedicated caregiver completely abandoned, revealing the cold, calculating woman beneath. "You haven't heard the last of me. No one will take care of her like I did. This old woman is too much trouble for any normal person to handle. Please gather your things and leave," Raphael repeated, opening the door. "Don't force me to make this situation more unpleasant than it already is." With a final contemptuous look at Geraldine, Janine went to the maid's room, quickly threw her belongings into a suitcase and left, not without casting one last veiled threat. "This won't end here. You don't know who you're dealing with." When the door finally closed behind her, a heavy silence fell over the apartment. Geraldine, still trembling slightly, looked at her son with tear-filled eyes. "Will she come back to punish me?" Raphael knelt beside his mother's armchair, holding her hands gently. "No, Mum, she's never coming back. I promise. Louisa will take care of you now, and Helen will continue to come and help too. You are safe." That night, after Geraldine finally fell asleep under Louisa's watchful care, Raphael and Helen sat on the apartment balcony, emotionally exhausted, but relieved to have finally ended the situation. "I should have realized sooner," Raphael said, contemplating the city lights. The signs were there. "Manipulators like Janine are experts at creating perfect facades," Helen replied. "You acted as soon as you realized something was wrong. Many families never even discover the abuse." Raphael turned to her, his gaze intense. "Thank you. For everything. Without you—" He hesitated, unable to complete the sentence. Helen smiled softly, touched by the sincerity in his voice. There was something about that man. His devotion to his mother, his integrity, the vulnerability he rarely showed, that resonated deeply within her. "It's my job," she replied simply, though both knew it had become more than that. What neither of them imagined was that, while they celebrated that small victory, Janine was already plotting her revenge, determined not to lose the comfortable position she had gained in the Campbell family so easily. The following weeks brought a remarkable transformation to Mrs. Geraldine's apartment. Under Louisa's care, the atmosphere became lighter, more welcoming. The new caregiver brought with her not only professional competence, but a genuine affability that was contagious to everyone around her. "Shall we try this recipe today, Mrs. Geraldine?" Louisa suggested, showing a cookbook with colorful photos. "The cornmeal cake with guava paste is my specialty, and I'm sure Mr. Campbell will love it when he comes to visit us." Gradually, Geraldine began to regain something of her old personality. The constant fear that had marked her days with Janine was replaced by a cautious tranquility, then by moments of authentic joy. Although Alzheimer's continued its inexorable course, the elderly woman's quality of life improved considerably. Helen maintained her regular visits, not only out of professional obligation, but also because she had developed a special affection for Geraldine, and, though she was reluctant to admit it, for Raphael too. The professional visits often extended into conversations about literature, music, or simply observations about life. "My husband liked this music," Geraldine commented one afternoon, as they listened to Tom Jobim on the old record player Raphael had rescued from storage. "We would dance in the living room when Raphael was already asleep." "Do you still remember how to dance?" Louisa asked gently. To everyone's surprise, Geraldine rose with unexpected agility and extended her arms, as if holding an invisible partner. "The body remembers what the mind forgets," she said, taking a few graceful dance steps. It was at that moment that Raphael arrived, witnessing the scene with tear-filled eyes. His mother, who weeks earlier could barely express an opinion without looking fearfully at Janine, now danced with a joy he hadn't seen in years. "Come, son," Geraldine called, extending her hand. "Your father was never a good dancer, but you can be better." Raphael laughed, embarrassed but moved, and accepted his mother's invitation. As they danced awkwardly around the room, he noticed Helen watching the scene with a tender smile at the corner of her lips. Life finally seemed to be getting back on track. Raphael managed to reorganize his work schedule, delegating more responsibilities to his managers so he could spend more time with his mother. Sunday evenings became a sacred ritual, family dinner, with Louisa preparing Geraldine's favorite dishes, and Helen often invited to join them. It was on one of those evenings, as the New York winter began to show its first signs, that Raphael's phone rang. It was Maurice, his voice tense on the other end of the line. "Raphael, we have a problem. Janine is at the office demanding to speak with you. She says she'll call the press if you don't meet her." "The press? What is she talking about?" "She's claiming she was unfairly dismissed, that the accusations are false. She's threatening to sue you and the company for emotional damages. And there's more. She has a folder full of documents that she says prove you've been rigging bids to get public contracts." Raphael felt his blood run cold, not because of the fraud accusations, which were completely unfounded, but because of the woman's audacity. Clearly Janine had not given up. "I'm on my way. Don't let her leave, but don't say anything to her either. And call our legal department immediately." As he hung up, he found 3 pairs of eyes watching him with concern. "Is there a problem?" Helen asked, noticing his tense expression. Raphael hesitated, not wanting to disturb the quiet dinner atmosphere, especially in front of his mother, who was already sufficiently fragile. "A situation at the office that I need to resolve," he replied vaguely. "Unfortunately, I'll have to leave now. Mom, do you forgive me?" "Of course, my son. Work doesn't wait," Geraldine replied, understanding as always. But Helen was not so easily convinced. She followed Raphael to the hallway as he prepared to leave. "It's Janine, isn't it?" she asked directly. Seeing Raphael's surprised expression, she explained, "I heard her name when you were on the phone. What does she want?" Raphael sighed, realizing it was no use hiding the truth from Helen. "She's at the office making absurd accusations, threatening to sue me and take the case to the press. Apparently she has proof of alleged fraud in the company." "That's ridiculous," Helen replied, indignant. "We have concrete evidence of the abuse she committed against your mother. If anyone should be worried about lawsuits, it's her." I know, but I need to handle the situation before it gets out of control. Janine seems like the type of person who doesn't mind going down with the ship, as long as she causes damage. I'm coming with you, Helen suddenly decided when there's no need, but yes, there is. I'm a witness to what happened to your mother. I have the documented medical evidence. If she wants a fight, we shouldn't let her define the battlefield. The determination in Helen's eyes left no room for argument. Moreover, Raphael realized he appreciated the idea of having her firm and sensible presence by his side in that confrontation. After briefly explaining the situation to Louisa, who assured him she would take good care of Geraldine during his absence, Raphael and Helen headed to Campbell Engineering's office in the city's financial district. When they arrived, they found a tense atmosphere. Janine was sitting in the reception area, wearing an elegant pantsuit that contrasted sharply with the simple uniform she wore as a caregiver. Beside her, a middle-aged man with an executive briefcase, probably a hastily hired lawyer. Finally, Janine said upon seeing Raphael, standing up with a cold smile. Her smile wavered slightly when she noticed Helen. I see you brought backup. Let's go to my office, Raphael replied dryly, ignoring the provocation. Maurice, please call Dr. Anthony to join us. Dr. Anthony Barnes was Campbell Engineering's chief legal counsel, an experienced man who had worked with the family for over 2 decades. His discreet and competent presence would be vital in that situation. Once in Raphael's spacious office, overlooking the city's illuminated skyline, everyone took their seats. The tension was palpable, like electricity in the air before a storm. So, Janine, why don't you explain exactly what you want? Raphael began, keeping his voice controlled. It's simple, she replied, opening her folder. I want compensation for unfair dismissal and for damages to my professional reputation. I have a document here detailing my terms. She slid a sheet of paper across the table. Raphael took the paper and nearly choked when he saw the astronomical sum demanded. This is extortion, Dr. Anthony commented calmly after glancing at the document. And you should know that extortion is a crime under the penal code. It's not extortion when one has legitimate rights, Janine's lawyer intervened. My client was falsely accused of abuse and negligence, dismissed without due process, and is now unable to find employment in her field due to these unfounded allegations. Unfounded. Helen couldn't contain her indignation. We have documented evidence, medical reports, photographs of Mrs. Geraldine's bruises, and video recordings that clearly show your client's abusive behavior. As she mentioned the recordings, Helen noticed Janine's face pale slightly, quickly masked by an expression of disdain. Recordings obtained without my knowledge or consent, Janine retorted, completely inadmissible in court. Not when the objective is to protect a vulnerable person in a risky situation, Dr. Anthony calmly replied. Jurisprudence in these cases is clear. Regardless, Janine's lawyer continued, my client possesses information about irregularities in Campbell Engineering's bidding processes that would certainly interest the authorities and the press. Perhaps it would be in everyone's interest to find an amicable solution to this impasse. Raphael felt a cold fury grow within him. Not only had that woman abused his vulnerable mother, now she was trying to blackmail him with fabricated accusations. That's a lie, he said, his voice low and dangerously controlled. Campbell Engineering has an impeccable record in all the bids it has participated in. Our audits are public and transparent. That's not what these documents show, Janine insisted, pulling more papers from her folder. Dr. Anthony examined the presented documents, his experienced face revealing nothing. After a few minutes, he simply returned the papers to the table. These are preliminary internal projects, not official bidding documents. They prove absolutely nothing beyond the fact that you had undue access to confidential company files, which constitutes another crime. How did you get these documents? Raphael asked, suddenly understanding. You stole them from my computer at home. Janine's smile confirmed his suspicion. You often left your laptop open when you came to visit your mother. I thought it prudent to keep some guarantees. You never know when they might come in handy. It was at that moment that Helen played her own trump card. From her purse, she took out a tablet and placed it on the table. Before we continue with these veiled threats, I think everyone should see this. She opened a video, one of the most disturbing recordings from the security system. In it, Janine could be clearly seen screaming at Mrs. Geraldine, forcing her to take medication, shaking her by the arms when the elderly woman resisted. "You useless old woman. Do you think I have patience for your quirks? If it weren't for your son's money, I would have left you in a nursing home a long time ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Janine's lawyer seemed genuinely shocked, looking at his client with a new perspective. "There are dozens of videos like this," Helen continued calmly. "Medical documentation of the bruises, testimony from Mrs. Geraldine herself, recorded on video during one of her more lucid phases, and, of course, the incident where you abandoned her alone for almost 3 hours, leaving her in degrading conditions." Janine stared at the frozen video screen, her face a mask of impotent fury. "So," Raphael concluded, leaning forward, "here's my counteroffer. You drop these ridiculous accusations, sign a confidentiality agreement, and never approach my family or company again. In return, we will not take this evidence to the police for a formal accusation of elder abuse and attempted extortion." "And if I refuse?" Janine challenged, though her tone had already lost its initial confidence. "Then we'll have the displeasure of meeting in court," Dr. Anthony replied softly. "And I can assure you, based on what I've just seen, that it won't be a favorable outcome for you." Janine's lawyer cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should consider Mr. Campbell's proposal. Ms. Sanders, a mutual confidentiality agreement seems to be the most sensible solution at this time." Janine looked around, realizing she had lost all her leverage. Her plan, crafted in anger and a desire for revenge, crumbled before the irrefutable evidence of her own actions. "You haven't heard the last of me," she threatened, standing abruptly. "Actually," Helen said, her voice firm, "I believe we have. Because if you try anything against this family again, I will personally be responsible for ensuring that every second of those videos reaches the competent authorities." Defeated, Janine signed the documents prepared by Dr. Anthony and left the room with what little dignity she could muster, her lawyer following her with obvious disapproval. When the door finally closed, Raphael collapsed into his chair, the tension of the last few hours finally taking its toll. "It's over," he murmured, running his hands over his face. "It's finally over." Helen approached, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Your mother is safe now. That's what matters." Raphael looked at her, seeing not only the competent professional who had saved his family from a terrible situation, but the extraordinary woman who had brought light back into his mother's life and his own. "Thank you," he said simply, covering her hand with his, "for everything." In that moment, something shifted between them, a silent recognition that what they had shared in recent weeks went beyond a professional relationship. It was a deeper connection, born of adversity faced together, of mutual trust established, and of a respect that had blossomed into something more. "We should go back," Helen suggested softly. "Your mother will be worried." Raphael nodded, but before they could leave, Maurice appeared at the door with a worried expression. "Raphael, I just got a call from Louisa. Mrs. Geraldine is very agitated, asking for you. It seems she had a stronger episode of confusion and is convinced something terrible has happened." Raphael and Helen exchanged alarmed glances before rushing to the parking lot. The night still held another challenge, perhaps the most difficult of all: calming the frightened heart of a mother who, even lost in the mists of Alzheimer's, felt when her son was in danger. The rain fell softly over New York City as Raphael and Helen arrived at the building. Sebastian, the doorman, noticing their worried expressions, quickly opened the garage gate without asking questions. The elevator ride to Mrs. Geraldine's floor seemed endless, the silence between them heavy with apprehension. As soon as they entered the apartment, they were greeted by Louisa, whose worried expression only intensified Raphael's anxiety. "She was fine until shortly after you left," the caregiver explained in a low voice. "Then suddenly she started to get agitated, saying you were in danger, that that woman was going to hurt you. I tried to calm her down, but she insisted she needed to see you to make sure everything was all right." Raphael nodded, heading immediately to his mother's room. Helen followed, maintaining a respectful distance. Mrs. Geraldine was sitting on the edge of the bed, still fully dressed, her hands nervously twisting a fabric handkerchief. Upon seeing her son, her face lit up with relief. "Raphael, thank God," she exclaimed, extending her arms. "I knew! I felt she was going to do something to you." "It's all right, Mom," Raphael assured, sitting beside her and taking her hands in his. "We've resolved everything. Janine won't bother us anymore. You promise?" She said terrible things. "That she would harm you, that she knew people." "I promise," he affirmed with conviction. "She has no power over us now." Geraldine studied her son's face for a few moments, as if seeking to confirm the truth of his words. Then, seemingly satisfied, she visibly relaxed. Her gaze shifted to Helen, who remained discreetly at the door. "Are you all right too, dear?" the elderly woman asked with genuine concern. "I'm perfectly fine, Mrs. Geraldine," Helen replied, approaching, "and very happy to see that you are well too." A gentle smile lit up the elderly woman's face. "You two, you take such good care of me," she murmured, looking from one to the other. Then, with a lucidity that was surprising on her good days, she added, "You know, you make a beautiful couple." The comment caught both Raphael and Helen off guard. They exchanged embarrassed glances, a slight blush coloring both their faces. "Mom," Raphael began, but Geraldine interrupted him with a gesture. "An old heart still recognizes love when it sees it, even when the mind fails," she said with surprising clarity. "Marianne was a good wife, and I know you loved her deeply. But she would want you to move on, my son." The silence that followed was charged with emotion. Helen, feeling the intensity of the moment, discreetly stepped away, murmuring that she would help Louisa prepare some tea for everyone. When they were alone, Raphael held his mother's hands affectionately. "You always knew how to read people better than anyone," he admitted. "Helen is unspecial, but everything happened so fast in such complicated circumstances. Time doesn't wait, son, especially for someone who has lived as long as I have." Geraldine touched Raphael's face tenderly. "When the heart finds its home, it's foolish to delay the change." That night marked a turning point. After settling Geraldine, who fell asleep peacefully, Raphael walked Helen to the door. The rain had stopped, leaving the air with that peculiar fragrance of wet earth that perfumes New York City nights after a storm. "Thank you again for everything today," he said, hesitating on the threshold. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." "We would have found another way," Helen replied with a soft smile. "You're stronger than you think, Raphael." He returned the smile, feeling a growing certainty in his chest. Without planning, without rehearsing, the words simply flowed. "Would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow?" "Just the two of us." The brief moment of surprise on Helen's face soon gave way to a warm expression. "I'd love to," she replied simply. Dinner the following night, at a discreet restaurant in the Upper East Side, was the first of many. In the weeks that followed, Raphael and Helen built a relationship that transcended the situation that had initially brought them together. They talked about books, music, old dreams, and future hopes. They shared stories of childhood, losses, and new beginnings. For Raphael, it was like rediscovering a part of himself that had remained dormant since Marianne's passing. With Helen, he found not a substitute for his past love, but a completely new companion who saw and accepted him exactly as he was now. "I never thought I'd fall in love with a patient," Helen confessed one Sunday afternoon as they walked through Central Park. "Technically, my mother was your patient, not me," Raphael joked, intertwining his fingers with hers. "An important detail," she laughed, squeezing his hand. Their relationship blossomed naturally, without haste, built on a solid foundation of mutual respect and admiration. Helen continued to visit Mrs. Geraldine professionally, but now also as a friend and gradually as part of the family. Geraldine, even on her most confused days, never failed to recognize Helen. It was as if the nurse's presence awakened a special clarity in her increasingly clouded mind. "You bring light to this house," she once said when Helen was helping her with physical therapy exercises. "To my Raphael, too. He smiles more now." 6 months after the confrontation with Janine on a starry night, Raphael took Helen to dinner at the same restaurant as their first date. After dessert, as they contemplated the illuminated city through the panoramic window, he took a small velvet box from his pocket. "I know it might seem too fast," he began, nervous as a teenager. "But when you find something so precious, so unexpected, age teaches us not to waste time with doubts." Helen looked at the still-closed box, her eyes bright with contained emotion. You helped me protect the most important person in my life, he continued. In the process, you became equally important to me. Helen? He opened the box, revealing a delicate white gold ring with a central sapphire. Would you do me the honor of sharing your life with me? First and only, for an instant that seemed eternal, Helen just looked at the ring, then at Raphael's anxious face. When she finally spoke, her voice was charged with emotion. For a long time, I dedicated my life to others, to caring for those who needed it. I never imagined that, by doing exactly that, I would find someone who wanted to care for me, too. She extended her hand, her eyes fixed on his. Yes, Raphael. 1,000 times yes. The wedding was an intimate ceremony, held in the garden of the new house they had bought together, a spacious residence in Greenwich Village, with enough room for Mrs. Geraldine to live with them comfortably, with a room specially adapted for her needs. Louisa continued as a full-time caregiver, now as an essential part of the expanded family. The decision to keep Geraldine with them, instead of seeking a specialized institution, was unanimous. She gave us everything, Raphael said during discussions on the matter. It's our turn to give back, to ensure that her days are lived with dignity and surrounded by love. Helen, whose professional experience daily showed her the deficiencies of the elder care system, could not agree more. Together, they created an environment where Geraldine could face the progression of her disease with maximum comfort and safety. Life took its course with the inevitable ups and downs. Geraldine's condition had good days and bad days. There were mornings when she recognized everyone immediately, participating in conversations with surprising lucidity, and there were days when she looked at her son with eyes devoid of recognition, asking when little Raphael would return from school. On one of those difficult mornings, Helen found Raphael on the balcony, watching the garden where his mother, under Louisa's attentive supervision, watered the flowers with a serene expression, although minutes earlier she had not recognized her own son. It's like losing her little by little every day, he murmured, when Helen joined him. But it's also finding her in every small moment of clarity, she replied, embracing him around the waist. In every smile, in every gesture of affection. Raphael nodded, finding comfort not only in his wife's words, but in the certainty that he was not facing that journey alone. 3 months after the wedding, during a routine medical examination, Helen received news that would transform their lives once again. She was pregnant. At 43, pregnancy was not in her plans. They had both discussed and agreed that their family was already complete with Geraldine and the two of them. How is this possible? Helen asked, still in shock, looking at the test result. I thought that... At my age. The doctor smiled, explaining that although less common, women in their 40s could still conceive naturally. It was considered a high-risk pregnancy, certainly, but perfectly viable with proper care. When Helen told Raphael the news, his reaction was one of surprise, followed by a joy so pure and genuine that it dispelled any doubt she might have had. A child, he repeated, hugging her carefully, as if she were already fragile. Our child. Telling Mrs. Geraldine was a special moment. On a lucid afternoon, sitting in the garden under the shade of a jabuticaba tree, Helen took her mother-in-law's hands in hers. Mrs. Geraldine, we have some news for you, she began, exchanging a knowing look with Raphael. In a few months you're going to be a grandmother. The elderly woman's eyes widened, a crystalline understanding shining in them. A baby? You're going to have a baby? The joy in her voice was palpable. Yes, Mom, Raphael confirmed, moved by her reaction. Helen is 2 months pregnant. Geraldine brought her hands to her face, tears of happiness streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. My God, what a blessing, she murmured. Then, surprising them both, she placed her hand on Helen's still flat belly. It's a girl. Helen and Raphael exchanged amused glances but did not contradict her. It was too early to know the baby's gender, but there was something in Geraldine's quiet certainty that seemed to transcend medical logic. The months of pregnancy brought a new light to the house. Geraldine, even on her most confused days, seemed especially attuned to Helen's condition. They often found her organizing small baby clothes, some old, probably Raphael's, others that no one knew where they had come from. For little Claire, she would explain naturally, as if her great-granddaughter's name was already decided. Raphael and Helen, following Geraldine's intuition, began to refer to the baby as Claire even before the ultrasound that confirmed, to the doctor's astonishment and the family's joy, that they were indeed expecting a girl. When Claire finally arrived, on a sunny spring morning, she brought with her a renewal of hope for the entire family. Small but healthy, with dark down covering her round head, she was introduced to her great-grandmother on the same day, still in the maternity ward. It was one of Geraldine's most lucid moments in months. Holding her great-granddaughter with firm hands, she looked at the sleeping face with an expression of deep recognition. "She has my mother's eyes," she said softly, although Claire's eyes were closed. "She will be strong and kind, like all the women in this family." In the months that followed, Claire's presence brought a special balance to the house. It was as if the cycle of life was completed there. Geraldine slowly walking towards the twilight of her days, Claire blossoming in the first rays of her existence, and between them, Raphael and Helen, privileged witnesses to this meeting of souls on different journeys. On a particularly beautiful afternoon, when Claire was 6 months old, the family gathered in the garden to also celebrate Mrs. Geraldine's 80th birthday. The elderly woman, sitting in her favorite chair with her great-granddaughter on her lap, looked around with an expression of deep peace. "You know," she said, surprising everyone with the clarity of her voice, "when I started forgetting things, my greatest fear was being a burden, being abandoned, ending my days alone." Raphael knelt beside the chair, holding his mother's free hand. "That would never happen. Mom?" "I know that now," she smiled, her eyes bright with wisdom. "But the fear was there. Then came the darkness, that woman, Janine, and for a while, I thought my fears were coming true." Helen approached too, touched by Geraldine's unexpected lucidity. "But then," the elderly woman continued, "the light came. You, dear Helen, and now this little one." She delicately kissed Claire's head, who gurgled happily. "This is how life should always be, taking care of each other, passing love on, like a river that never stops flowing." In that moment, observing his family gathered, his mother's wise fragility, his wife's gentle strength, his daughter's innocent promise, Raphael felt a gratitude so profound he could barely contain it in his chest. The journey had not been easy. There had been pain, betrayal, moments of despair, but through it all love had found its way, not like in fairy tales, with magic and instant solutions, but like in real life, imperfect, laborious, sometimes painful, but always worth every effort. And as the sun began to set on the New York City horizon, casting golden rays over that small piece of paradise they had built together, Raphael knew with absolute certainty that no matter what the future held, more challenges with his mother's health, the ups and downs of parenthood, life's inevitable storms, they would face everything together, as a family, because in the end that's what truly mattered, not the years we have, but the love we share during the time we are given. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Raphael, Mrs. Geraldine, and Helen has deeply touched your hearts. To continue experiencing emotions like this, we have a special playlist with other equally touching American stories. Find it by clicking here on the side. If this journey of love overcoming adversity and new beginnings moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Every day we bring stories that explore the complexities of American family life with its pains and joys. And have you experienced or witnessed a story of care and renewal like this? Share it with us in the comments. Your experience might inspire other listeners who are going through similar situations. Until the next story.